Pantes! Okay, so here's our creed. Like tuto let's start here. Kai homologumenos. So here's epirema is a adverb, right? Epirema. We can tell by looking at the omicron sigma, or sorry, the omega sigma at the end. That tells us, that's what it is. So he's saying confessedly, like in English, when we say adverb, you may remember this from English grammar, adverb, right? Which is something that describes how an action is done. So it describes the verb. It's about the verb, right? That's why hence the name adverb, right? So about the action, right? So so we take an adjective, right? Adjective, and we basically add ly in English, right? So typically, if you take the word quick, which is an adjective, and you say quickly, or intelligent, it's an adjective. What kind of person is he? Because adjectives describe nouns, right? Person, place, or thing. So he's an intelligent man. So if you want to talk about the action that he's doing, like he's reading, he's studying, right? So he's studying intelligently, right? Intelligently. So there's your changing of your adjective into an adverb. That's typically how we do it in English, right? In Greek, it's easy to see if we start with a masculine, right? So let's say, yeah, so we've got, yeah, so I'm not going to put accents in, but homologumenos. So we start with that, which it's an adjective. It's actually a participle, which is part verb, part adjective, right? It's an adjectival verb. So it's an adjective here. Now, if we change that to omega, right? So now that's what he did. And now it becomes an adverb. So that lengthening that omicron when it's masculine to an omega, that's how you change. Yeah, change it into there. So yeah, again, how do you say adverb? Epirema. So epirema. Oh, actually, there's reduplication there. A lot of times that happens with when a prefix is added to a word that starts with a row, then we get that reduplication for some reason. Like, yeah, so epirema. You see that a lot. If you haven't noticed that, pay attention when you're looking, whether it's us here on this channel or whether we're looking at the New Testament or you're reading the New Testament. Yeah, if something starts with a row and then there's a prefix slapped on, you won't just have epi, it'll duplicate, you'll get reduplication there. So epirema. Yeah, you know what? Let me check that just to make sure. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell that. But yeah, you get a lot of that reduplication with row. So epirema, yeah, epirema, there you go. So epirema, and I'm sure it'll say it can be used as an adverb. Yep, that's one of the uses of it. Okay. All right, going back where we were. So epirema, so this is the adverb. So that's what homologumenos, that's an adverb, right? So kai homologumenos mega esten to tes eusebeas musterion. Like to, udeteron, that's how we say neuter, udeteron. It's not masculine, which is arsenicon. Okay, thelukon is feminine, thelukon is feminine. Arsenicon is masculine, thelukon is feminine. Here it's udeteron, that's neuter, right? Udeteron. So which noun is it? So we would say poteronorma estin, which noun? Poteronorma. So is it this one? Estentuto? Nai, to musterion. So to musterion. So this kind of thing happens a lot. So if something is kind of the genitive of something, like, kind of describing it or something, a noun, a lot of times it gets injected between the article and the noun. That happens a lot in Greek. It's not unique to the New Testament, so just get used to that. So it's the idea of to musterion, tes eusebeas. Eusebeas, tes eusebeas. So we've got eusebea. Hey eusebea is the noun. Yeah, I think it's a noun. But anyway, so it's the pious or the religious or the yeah kind of thing. So if I take from this root, so we got eu as an adverb, as in epirema, and it means like well or good. Good is really an adjective, but it's the idea of well, right? So ego grafo, I'm writing. How do I write? Eu grafo. I write well, right? That would be one application. So a lot of times that acts as a prefix, right? So you got eu slapped on to the root of some word. So if I just take this root and I have a verb, sabomai, ego sabomai ton theon. I am pious. I am, sabomai kind of means two things. And the root idea means two things. It's the idea of phobumai, I fear, ego phobumai ton theon. I fear God, right? Kai eo timo ton theon. I honor God, right? I respect God. So it's the combination of the two. So sebomai ton theon. I am pious. I fear and I honor and respect God. So phobumai ton theon. I fear God. Fear God. Kai ego timo. Remember, timo is an alpha contract verb, so it's shutimas ton theon. You honor God. Shutimas ton theon. Ego timo ton theon. I honor God. I respect God, right? Honor, respect. So ego sebomai ton theon. I combination of those. Pros ton theon, towards God, right? So to mysterion tes eo sebeas. So it's this mystery. You might have recognized that you might have guessed that the mystery of religious or piety or this fear and respect, right? And it's great. It's big. It's mega. So here's the neuter udeteron, epitheton. Now maybe I didn't say that. Epitheton is an adjective. Epitheton, right? So megas is the masculine, and then mega is neuter, right? So homologumenos, mega estin to mysterion tes eusebeias. So this kind of, because it's a participle, but it's turned into a epirema, it's turned into an adverb, it kind of implies the verbal action together with the idea of the adverb, right? So it's like homologumai. So I confess. In Attic Greek, if you use it and the direct object was in the dative, it was the idea of agreeing with somebody or something, right? So little bit, and then as we go more towards Koine, towards New Testament, it starts to take on more the idea of like confession, because this root right here of homo, it's together. It's the idea of being together with something. And then this comes from logos, which is John chapter 1 verse 1, or lego, the verb lego, ego lego soy, I say to you, right? So you put those together and it's kind of like speaking together with somebody, right? Which is the idea of agreeing. Typically in the New Testament, very similar idea, but coming from a different angle. We take the preposition sun, which is like with, if it's used as a preposition and the object of the preposition is the dative case, epitosis estin dotike, right? Sun, sun soy, with you. Soon moi, with me, right? So yeah, so we basically have symfono, and it's an epsilon contract. Symfono soy, right? So here's the dative, right? Symfono soy. So this sum is the idea of together, with together, which is this idea, homos, yeah, so it's that idea. And then speaking, well, here phoneo is to make sounds, so that's almost exactly the same pattern, and both of them, can be, certainly this is in the New Testament period, but this one kind of transitioned to where, yeah, it's more the idea of lego, speaking, right? So speaking together, as in confessing because you're agreeing. Now in Latin, you may not know this, the prefix of confess, that's where it's come from, is with, right? So the equivalent of sum in Greek is con, you know, like yeah, con, like with something, right? So, and then fes, I'm not a Latin person, so I know this much about Latin. So I know in Greek fami, and maybe it gets it from that facie, that's probably where that comes from. Because I know when the Romans conquered the Greeks, they kind of assimilated some of the things of Greek, even in their language and stuff. So maybe that comes from autos facie, he's saying to somebody, you know, fes, confess. So this is the idea of agreement, right? Yeah, I mean it really has to do with like pretty much today, like just speaking, confessing something, admitting something, right? But that's where this all maps back to the idea of agreement, right? So anyway, enough about that. Homologumenos mega estin, to mysterion tes eosobeas. So this mystery of this fearing God and honoring God. And this is how it starts. Arxomata, nun, like let's start now, right? Theos, God. Ephinerothe in sarki. He's revealed in flesh. Yeah, let me get rid of this here. Let's see. He's revealed in flesh. So let me explain a little bit about, there's a little controversy here, and some people will notice in their Bibles, well, yeah, but mine doesn't say God, mine says he, right? So let's talk about that for a second, because it's a very understandable controversy. Here's why. The oldest manuscripts we have, are uncials or majuscules. Choose which word. It basically means capital letters, right? And it's the idea of no punctuation, no accent marks. I mean, it's nice that we're using accent marks that were kind of put down, I think, in the 6th century AD. They started doing that in the East, in the Byzantine Empire, I think. Thank goodness. Yeah, those are really useful to help with pronunciation, get the pronunciation correct. And so they also use nomina sacra, which we've talked in. I did a short and I talked about that. If you want to go check that out, look for that. The short, shorts are 60 seconds. Nomina sacra. So basically the idea of some of them, and they typically 2 letters, could be 3 letters. There's a bunch of them for, like, you know, whether it's, you know, Jesus or God, or whether it's spirit, or whether it's, you know, there's a bunch of the typical, you know, pious words in the New Testament. Because, I mean, paper was very expensive back then, you know, which was parchment or vellum, which is animal skin. But in the time of Jesus, it might have been a little bit of use of that. That would transition over the next couple of centuries to become the predominant way of doing it. But time of Jesus and maybe before, they were writing on vegetable material that was called papyrus. That was basically where we get our word paper, right? So anyway, it was expensive. It was also expensive to get a scribe to actually copy it, make a copy for you, because they didn't have a printing press or anything, right? So so yeah, trying to take common words and shorten them, and that's why they didn't have any spaces between words. You know, it's capital letters and they're all squished together. And you can't really know Greek. Like when I read, you know, I got a copy of Codex Vaticanus, and if you haven't seen my short on that, where I'm reading out of the Codex Vaticanus, and then a few other ancient codices as well, like Bibles that are dated, you know, 300s, 400s, you know, 500s, like that. I really get a thrill out of that. I love it, right? So whether it's I'm reading Hebrew and I'm reading from, you know, ancient stuff, you know, or whether it's not, especially like that, like, I don't know, I just think it's so cool. So anyway, so yeah, these shortened words. So you have theos, right? So and I lined them up here. So either you got this nomina sacra for theos, or you've got this relative pronoun hos, right? So relative pronouns, you know, usually you go from one sentence to another and it kind of bolts them together. And it's the idea of, in English, where we might say something, let's say the cat left the house, and then we say that, or we might say which he lives in, right? So it's a way of like actually not only using a conjunction like and or but, or a lot of different conjunctions we have, or but it's the type of conjunction that actually refers back to its antecedent. So in Greek, because of it using singular, plural, and masculine, feminine, it really helps you know what the antecedent is, right? Whereas in English, like, yeah, the only thing you can go with by context. You say, okay, the cat left the house, which he lives in. You can tell by context that that's the antecedent is the house, right? So that's what, the idea of hos. And typically that's the way it's used. In the context of this passage, I don't really see where hos is being used that way. I think sometimes in the New Testament, it still will use these relative pronouns. I find it really kind of strange, but whether we're using a personal pronoun like autos, which means he, or the neuter form auto, or the feminine aute, right? That's the nominative, eothea. Hey, eothea ptosis, estin tuto. Aute, autos, auto. If it's neuter, udeteron, auto. Or we might use the demonstrative pronoun, which typically is a way of pointing to, and I've mentioned this in other videos, maybe you've seen me talk about this, where it's pointing to a previously discussed subject, or it doesn't have to be a subject, but a noun, definitely. And the context kind of makes it clear. And so if whichever one I was just talking about, I can then say, let's say I was just talking about the cat, I could say, let's say cat is singular nominative, or say singular masculine. I can then say hutos, right? So hutos, meaning this one, the one we're just talking about. Now, if there was a different cat or a dog or something like that that was talked about before that, and now we're contrasting, well, we were previously talking about the dog, and then we started talking about this cat, and then all of a sudden I want to use a pronoun instead of keep saying dog and cat all the time. I could say hutos to refer to the cat, or I can use a kenos, which is that one, a kenos, to refer to the previous entity that we were just talking about, right? Whether it's a living thing, whether it's a house, or whatever it is you're talking about. And so the fact that this is masculine singular, your antecedent would have to be masculine singular, right? So similar with when I was saying autos, aute, personal pronoun, it also has to, if it's masculine singular, it has to, it maps back to, the noun that was masculine singular, right? So it's got to agree in gender and number, as they say. So instead of using hutos or autos, which would make more sense, they use hos. But they weren't just talking about Jesus, but you could tell by the context that's who they're talking about. That's why it's such a controversy, because it's like, it's a really strange use to all of a sudden start using a relative pronoun. However, it sure makes sense we just have a bar in there, and now it's theos because it's nomina sacra for theos. It's theos ephainero. That makes sense. Now, the controversy for me, I really wrestle with this. I am a person that typically goes, I'm going to put more weight. Typically, yeah, usually I want to look at all the evidence, but typically I'm going to go with the minority text, as they say. I mean, I don't like that name, but because the majority text is the idea of when you look at the totality of all the 5,840 some manuscripts we have in the New Testament, how many of them fall in the Byzantine family versus the the Western versus the Alexandrian versus maybe the Caesarean, whatever. And so like the majority of them are Byzantine. So that's what we call it, the majority text. And then these others are kind of minorities, like definitely less than 1,000 of all those 5,800, together make up all these other ones. Now, the thing about it is that sometimes when people talk about this, they're a little unfair. They don't point out because they favor the majority text, which, I mean, in this case, I do. I'm like, I'll go with theos, because it just fits the context better. Theos ephainero, and that's why I wrote it that way, and that's why we're talking about it that way. And we'll be getting back to it here in a second. So enough of this stuff here in a second here, but just finishing up. So this controversy is understandable, because it's the majority, it's the later ones, or some of the earlier, codices that we have. We don't really have any, I haven't seen that we have, the early papyri, which date from the 100s and the 200s. And there's some in the 300s, but tradition pretty much starts to stop after that. And everybody is shifting to using animal skin because it just lasts longer, right? A lot longer. And so you see the scribes through the ages in, let's say, the Codex Vaticanus or Codex Sinaiticus, especially Sinaiticus, has got a lot of scribal, not errors, but scribal comments and corrections and stuff, whatever. And so you'll see them like correcting and putting a theos. A lot of the early stuff has these corrections, right? So it's like, okay, so that's the opinion of the scribe. What do you base that on? We don't know. We have no way of knowing, right? But there's a lot of them that have these scribal corrections on the side. So and I get it, because it makes sense. Like, so yeah, if we look at I could go look at verse 15 and 14 and whatever, and you can do that on your own. I'm not going to do that, but I just don't see how it fits to all of a sudden start using a relative pronoun hos ephinerothi in sarki, so that he was revealed in the flesh. It's not a huge deal. I think it's kind of cool if Paul really did say theos, right? God, because when you look at John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the word and he became flesh. It's Jesus Christ. It's so obvious that's what we're talking about. And then he says, the word was with God, in the sense of he was with the Father God, and he was divine, right? And so that's what we're talking about here. It's the one that came forth from the Father, the word. When God spoke, hotheos lege, then you use the noun logos, that's what John's talking about, the spoken word. He spoke, lego, and hologos, the spoken word, went forth and made all things. And that's what Paul's arguing in, I think it's Philippians chapter 2, whatever, or even John in chapter 1. Like, nothing was made except through the logos, right? God spoke. God's the creator, the architect, but he spoke in his word, who is spirit. God is spirit. Jesus tells that in John chapter 4, verse 24. And that logos went forth and created all things. And so, the people that explain in a modern sense, which is an evolution of the idea of Trinity, I find it not difficult at all. If you look at how the ancients, the first few centuries, explain it, it's so simple. God spoke. Well, when Jesus in the Gospel of John says literally that I came forth out of God, if they translate it that way, ek, the preposition ek to theou, so out of God, right? Why did God make Eve come out of Adam, right? Because it's what Paul is saying in Romans chapter 1, that the things of creation are easily seen from what has been created by nature, so that men are without excuse. And then he also says, and even divinity. Now, the old King James would say the Godhead, but it's theos with a iota, so we know it's an adjective, but it's the idea of divinity, right? So we even see the ideas of divinity in nature. So when God made a man and then took the woman from the man, the word coming forth from it's that kind of analogy, that kind of allegory. The word came forth from God. God has created us in his image, so that when we speak, the word goes forth from us, right? There's lots of things that go forth from us, and we'll just leave it there. But definitely with children coming forth from a mother is a picture of the word coming forth from God, right? Or the word coming forth from our mouths. Anyway, I could take that further, but I'll leave it there. But theos, ephinerothe in sarki. So God, divinity, was revealed, right? In sarki. So we got phinero, let's go to 1 Timothy, phinero. Yeah, I'm not going to try to do that context thing. That just take too long to make more the point about the relative pronoun. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, if we go here, so if I know, I think it's the Omicron contract. Yeah, finaroth. So yeah, so what we're doing here, finaroth, and all these cases, we haven't talked much. So again, with verbs, what do we have? We have tense, right? For English. Let's do a review here. Tense, we've got mood, every verb, and we got voice, right? So voice can be active voice, where the subject is doing the action, right? Not sure why I just did that mannerism, but anyway, so the subject is doing the action, right? And then passive is where the subject is having action kind of acted upon them. And so now we say it in such a way to where something happened to them. And then the middle voice is kind of the idea how a lot of more than English, a lot of languages, Spanish would be one of them, has what's called a reflexive idea, where a person is kind of doing something to themselves, right? So that's the middle voice, typically idea, right? So what we have here is aorist tense. That's what we have here. 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 Yeah, that's what we have here. And that's what we have here. So we have the aorist tense, and then we have the passive voice and the indicative mood, right? So the aorist tense indicative mood is how we get past tense, right? Whether you're using the imperfect tense or using the aorist tense, if you don't use the indicative mood, then you don't have, in an absolute sense, you don't have past tense. There's some, it's still, the statement is true in an absolute sense, you don't. There's some, like, say, the mood, participle is considered a mood. Infinitive doesn't have in any sense the idea of time, right? But the participle can, but not in an absolute sense. Like if you have an aorist participle, like we've talked in different videos, it's relative to the main verb, because in a sentence you have a main verb and then you might have a participle. You can have more than one participle, but you might have a participle, and that participle, you know, would be relative to the main verb in terms of timing. So it's a relative sense, right? So a lot of times, like things with Jesus, you know, there'll be an aorist active voice participle, and you know, it's saying that he, having just done something, he then, and now we have the main verb, you know, he went into Capernaum, or you know, he preached to the people, or he fed the 5,000, or whatever. But you know, some aorist participle to in an active voice that he just did. I mean, it doesn't have to be active voice, but could be, you know, middle passive or whatever. But I'm saying it's the idea, if it is an aorist participle, it's relative to the main verb. So in that sense, there's a little timing there. It's like this action happened before this, and it might be only moments before or whatever. So but in general, when we're talking about timing or time in an absolute sense, past tense, the mood has to be the indicative mood. So I've mentioned that in different videos. I want to drive that point home. It is kind of important. So yeah, all of these verbs, you know, ephainarothe, dikaiothe, ophthe, ekerukthe, episteothe, ainelefthe, analefthe. So all of these, yeah, aorist tense, indicative mood. And the thing to recognize with that is kind of this idea where we're, you know, if this is, all of these are third person. So when you have this third person theta eta at the end, it makes it easier to recognize. And certainly if you recognize this verb, right? So this is the idea of optomai se, optomai humas, like I see you guys, right? I see you, right? So what we have when it's in the present tense indicative like that, we have a p. So, you know, optomai, right? Optomai. So we have this p, and then we have a tau with it too, which, you know, that's fine. T is kind of a weak letter, so it kind of just kind of morphs together with the p. But what we end up doing when we go to the passive like this with aorist passive indicative, this p becomes aspirated, and we recognize that with phi, right? And here, if we have, in fact, let me go over this with you. I think I've done this on some videos, but just in case I haven't, in Greek, there's 3 basic families of consonants that you need to kind of know, like memorize, become very familiar with this morphology. This is a huge part when it comes to consonants, not vowels, talking about consonants. You know, this is a huge part of the morphology that really is going to help you recognize the different tenses with verbs, and even, you know, recognizing cognates that share the same root, like, oh, this noun shares it with the root of this, you know, like understanding that morphology. This is what I'm about to show you. This is huge. Let me say it again. So get this on straight. If you want to know Greek, get this on straight. So dentals. So in terms from a linguistic point of view, our teeth get involved, right? So this is true in so many languages, right? So a T or a D in English, right? Dentals, you know, obviously in Greek, that would be tau and delta, right? So yeah, there's some brilliance in this. And then labials. So lips. So that comes from Latin labials, right? Dentals comes from Latin, comes from, you know, teeth, right? So labials and things where our lips get involved, right? So now we've got the P and the B, beta, the P and the beta, right? And so we got that. And both of these, whenever there's a sigma, like you do in sometimes in the aorist, or definitely in the future tense, there's a sigma that gets involved. And so T and delta, those kind of cave whenever you turn it into the future tense, and it just becomes a sigma, right? They kind of cave in. They're really weak in that sense. I mean, they cave into the sigma, and it kind of gets absorbed. When we combine the P with a sigma or a beta with a sigma, they don't cave. They actually morph, and so what we get is a psi, right? Or I did a capital one. There's a lowercase psi. That's what we get. So if you combine beta and sigma together, again, this is the consonants. This is the morphology. You need to get this, because now I'll go back in a second. We'll start talking about this chi. We'll start talking about the fi, and it all makes sense. You'll see, and it'll help you recognize this stuff. So really memorize this stuff. So in the same family, while I'm at it, I'll just show you. When we have the aspirated form of a P, like a P and like a H, think of it that way, PH, right? Like we have in English, right? That's what we have in English, PH. So what do we have? We have, right? So that's this guy, right? And we have a T, and we add a H to it. In English, we get TH, right? So it's, and you know, people that really study what did Koine sound like in ancient periods, like, please don't put those comments on here. I already know the theory, man. And the point is like to me, I don't really care to speak the way they did in ancient times. To me, whichever of the three pronunciation styles that they have out there, whether it's modern, whether it's, you know, ancient restored, or whether it's the Erasmian pronunciation, wherever community that you can fold up with and hang out with and practice speaking with, right? Whether it's on this channel, this Erasmian, or whatever, get with your peeps and practice, because speaking the language together with reading out loud, listen to yourself, you know, of course, maybe memorizing, you know, some paradigms a little bit, you know, and a little bit of vocab cards, start, you know, using vocabulary cards, very helpful. But definitely speaking the language, whatever, that practice that you get with speaking and hearing, just listening. Once you can get to the point where you can listen, like maybe, for instance, you know, slow down some of my videos sometimes where I'm speaking, you know, and put it in 75% mode. I do that a lot of times. Like I'll go out, even to this day, like I'll be listening to a speech that maybe Christoforos Rico in Jerusalem he's given. He's just talking, or, you know, Mikhail Kefalos, what's his last name? I forget. Brilliant Greek teacher in Europe that also, he taught some of the classes when I was in Jerusalem. Like just some of these guys when they're talking, or Rogelio and Jenny on their Greek channel, Trihodos, like a lot of times when, you know, I'll slow it down sometimes 75%, and then just sit there and just take it in, listen, maybe even practice saying some of it. Very helpful when there's subtitles. Subtitles are so helpful. And then that practice, that internalizing the language like that is really going to help you. When you go to the text to read, it just makes you just know what you're reading when you're reading it. And this is how languages are meant to be. So whatever pronunciation style you choose, you know, get yourself in that community and you know, and hang out or whatever. So that's the point. So yeah, tau with the aspiration, you know, you get that theta, right? You get the theta. So we got a theta, that's the aspirated form of tau or delta, either one of those, right? And the aspirated phi, you know, aspirated form of p or beta. And then the palatals, yeah, palatals. Okay, palatals. So the palate, you know, of this whole, I mean, the vocal tract, the whole vocal tract. So whether it's your teeth, your lips, and your palate, you know, get involved. So the k and the g, you know, kind of back here, it is kind of a guttural idea. And especially when you aspirate that, right? So before we aspirate it, let's see what we got here. So we end up with a, when we combine it with a sigma, you know, we get a xi, right? In fact, if you go back far enough, I think it's pre-Attic Greek, before xi was adopted into the Greek alphabet, they just used kappa sigma. That's actually what they, and then they transitioned to actually make it a xi. So yeah, so the aspirated form of this, where we basically have a, you know, you could think of it as a kappa H or a, you know, GH, Although I know in English we do have GH sometimes, like the word night or something, whatever, but that's not what we're talking about here. Not exactly. So yeah, it's the letter, you know, chi, right? So it's kind of there is a hard k or a hard g to some degree, but it's aspirated. So you got to have the, something back there in the throat together with it. So like if we say, some people will make it more hard when they say kairo, I rejoice. Ego kairo. Yeah, ego kairo, blepsai say, blepen, humas. I rejoice to see you guys, right? Ego kairo, grapsai, t. I rejoice to write something, right? Whatever. So kairo, but I put more of a, I try to do a combination because of this obviousness of the implications of this, not so much a research in antiquity, like whatever, like it just makes sense. If I got a t and I want to put aspiration in it, I could see where, one idea would be this, but you do kind of get your tongue involved too. Theta, you can't do it without getting your tongue involved. So, t with the t, but the way we do it in Raspbian pronunciation is to make it more like where you get the tongue involved, and it's theta, right? But certainly there is an aspiration there. And then p with a f, yeah, that makes sense, So, and you are getting your lips involved when you're making that sound, and the air is kind of going through your lips. So hence the name Labials from Latin. And then palatals, you kind of get the k, but you got to get the back in your throat, guttural, that the aspiration involved with it. So I would say kairo, kairo. That's how I would say it. Some people put more like a kairo. They don't really put much aspiration. In fact, if I'm not careful, sometimes I'll do that as well. Anyway, this right here, this idea, please work on that. If you're not familiar with this, work on this, because trust me, this is sort of like if you've ever seen from 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the Karate Kid movie. That is such a great analogy where Daniel-san, if you remember him, there's Mr. Miyagi, the Japanese guy, right? And then you got Daniel, who wants to learn karate, right? He's getting beat up at school, whatever. And I'm not endorsing whether that, I used to do karate or whatever, but I just, as a Christian, Jesus says, love your enemies. But it's a great analogy. Paul would use analogies of war and stuff. He's not endorsing war, right? So similar kind of thing. But yeah, it's a great analogy. So for a teacher-student kind of thing, a lot of times a student really cannot see over the horizon to know is what this teacher's teaching me, especially with children in our grade school, right? Like they just need to be obedient. And it's nice that as long as the parents are kind of doing their job and raising their children properly, children just tend to obey, and I think that's why Jesus says, hey, unless you become like a little children, you certainly will not enter the kingdom of God. So that's one of the characteristics of a child is they obey their parents. They hang off their parents. I remember, I'm not political, but I know when I was in second grade, my mom was kind of a political. So I grew up in the 1970s, right? So here we are on the playground, and a big controversy at that time was President Nixon. So there was this controversy about President Nixon versus, Ford coming up for the election. And a bunch of us killed. I'm second grade, my sister's third grade, second and third graders all talking together about politics. What was our position whenever we were arguing about it? Whatever our parents said, we held their position, right? And so that's one of the beautiful things of children, which is the way we need to be with God. Whatever God says, we need to hold his position, right? So the idea, Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times you won't know how important something is. And so you just need to trust your teacher. If you've got to a point where you feel like you can trust your teacher and your teacher is teaching a certain something, it's not some sort of moral messed up thing. And like children learning alphabet or learn to, read or to this or that. And then in their mind, I'll never use this. A lot of young people will do that with certain things they're learning. And sometimes, and that's why they need their parents or their adults to be involved, because sometimes, especially today in the public school system, there's some garbage being taught for sure. But so they kind of need somebody running interference for them, but they don't know because they have this child mentality of just like, and that's the way they should be. Like Daniel needs to be that way with Mr. Miyagi when he's saying, hey, paint the fence. He has no idea why painting the fence right here 1,000 times, like making these strokes up and down, how that's going to ever be useful. And then he finds out later on that by doing that 1,000 times, like he's got this automatic blocking kind of, automatic, because he's done it so much, right? And similarly, like there's certain things. So having said all that, I'm sure you get my point. I hope you do. Learn this. It's going to help you. I guess what I would say is, let me say it this way. Let's use manzano. So manzano. So ego manzano, I learn or I study, right? So that's the verb, right? I learn. So what I'm going to say to you is, and we use the present tense, so there's an ongoing long-term thing. Manzanete. Manzanete, and of course that's humes, right? I shouldn't have to type humes. You should be able to recognize that humes, like you guys, y'all. Humes. Manzanete, like learn this. Manzanete tuto. Manzanete tuto. Learn this, study this, right? Okay, and that's going to come in handy. Apotaso, my humin.